When something goes wrong with your car, it's easy to take it to a mechanic for a quick fix. But when something's broken in America's criminal justice system, the next step isn't so easy. But before we talk about what's broken, let's talk about how it was built. America's criminal justice system is set up like a funnel. A lot of people commit crimes, but only some of those people are arrested, and only some of the people arrested are prosecuted. Only some of that sum are put on trial, and of those that are put on trial, usually a verdict is found. It's right here in prosecution that we begin to see a clog forming in the funnel.
The United States is home to 5% of the world's population, but 25% of the world's prisoners. Think about that. Our incarceration rate is 4 times higher than China's. We keep more people behind bars than the top 35 European countries combined.
The problem of over-incarceration is one that's affected my city and state especially, Tulsa, Oklahoma.
We are number 2 in the nation in the number of people that we incarcerate per 1,000.
The reality is we tend to incarcerate people in Oklahoma for things no other state incarcerates for. We tend to paint with a pretty broad brush when it comes to offenders who are found guilty of breaking the law, and we think that incarceration would be the answer.
In 1980, there were 500,000 people behind bars in America. 500,000 people in 1980. Today, there are 2.2 million. It has quadrupled.
In the 1980s, Reagan officially began his war on drugs, which focused on getting tough on drug laws. However, this change was detrimental to the American prison population, causing incarceration rates to skyrocket. A group especially affected by this was women. The graph of their incarceration rate took on the form of a hockey stick. The 1980s was down here. Today, it's skyrocketed all the way up here.
We are number 1 in the nation in incarcerating women, in fact in the world per capita. We've had that ranking for as long as I can remember, at least a decade.
For women, the abuse is pretty serious. 57% report sexual abuse. Most women who come to prison are drug possession. Most of the women use drugs to numb that pain.
We know that over 60% of the women who are incarcerated in Oklahoma have a substance abuse disorder. That is probably a low estimate.
As far as I can tell, addiction and mental illness are the only diseases that we incarcerate a person for. Studies have been conducted that identify common factors that lead a woman to become incarcerated in Oklahoma. Those factors would include abuse, violence, addiction, unresolved trauma, poverty, lack of education, low self-esteem, and the list goes on.
It's clear that most women affected by the criminal justice system are facing a stacked deck. That's why rehabilitation and reentry programs are so vital. In fact, this sandwich, named the Stacked Deck, was made by the women at Take Two, a reentry program through a Resonance Center.
Take Two houses and employs women in a transitional setting. It's a 6-month program that is structured, requiring a minimum of 3 recovery meetings a week. We have mentoring come in every other week, and they do community cooking with the women. Treatment absolutely gives them a chance.
Being here at Take Two, the Resonance, it's really showed me that there are people who love me and believe in me.
I heard a great story in NPR the other day about prisons in Denmark. They went through a big period of correction reform where they focused much more on rehabilitation, and now they have empty prisons and they have money to spend on rehabilitation. Whereas you come out of a prison in Oklahoma, you've got a felony in your record, you probably won't be able to get an apartment because you've got a felony, you can't get a job. For the rest of your life, you can't vote. They have an incentive to return to crime because they can't get ahead. And so they paid their debt, but yet they're still being punished by the state.
However, some people have a different view of the issue.
There are countless ways to avoid going to prison in the state of Oklahoma. We often like to say we don't send people to prison in this office, they break into it themselves by their own actions.
Others don't seem to be discussing the issue at all.
Do you think we need to stop putting so many nonviolent offenders in jail and paying $80 billion a year?
Well, I have to say this, in terms of our cities and in terms of the violent offenses, we have to get a lot tougher.
But with drug offenses making up over 46% of our federal prison population, it's obvious something needs to be done. Thankfully, my state is taking steps in the right direction.
Our state voted for 2 state questions during the general election.
Ultimately, in Oklahoma moving forward, low-level offenses such as simple drug possession and property crimes under $1,000 will be reclassified from felony convictions punishable by incarceration, which they are today, to misdemeanors punishable by treatment, mental health care, education, job training, and supervision in the community.
The money that is saved from locking all these drug offenders up will go into treatment and rehabilitation.
It's a win for individuals and families who battle addiction, but it's also a win for the taxpayers of our state. It costs much less to provide treatment and mental health care than it does to incarcerate an individual.
There's still much the President and Congress can do to help.
They could fund treatment over incarceration, and I feel that they could do a much better job at supporting reentry programs so that women coming back into our communities have a chance of being successful once they're released and don't go back to prison.
The more money you spend on incarceration, the less money you have to spend on education or health care or anything else that one may deem to be an important service of state government. Then also from a social justice standpoint, the reality is there's no such thing as a spare American. There's no such thing as a spare Oklahoman. I understand that there needs to be consequences, but appropriate consequences so that person can ultimately move on and become a stable, self-sufficient, contributing member within our communities.